If you're considering training as a yoga therapist, one of the biggest questions people have is this: what actually happens inside a yoga therapy training program? You'll often see descriptions of curriculum, hours, and certifications. But what most prospective students really want to understand is something deeper. How do you actually learn to work with real clients? How do students move from studying yoga and anatomy and philosophy, meditation, to becoming confident practitioners who can assess a client and design a therapeutic process? So in this video, I want to take you inside what yoga therapy training actually looks like and explain the key parts of training that help students develop real clinical skill. We'll look at guided case studies, mentorship and supervision, the practicum experience, case review and group learning, and the clinical method we use to approach therapeutic work. These are the parts of training that actually help students develop real clinical skill. For those who don't know me, my name is Brant Pasalacqua. I'm the founder and co-director of the Breathing Deeply Yoga Therapy School. Over the years, we've trained hundreds of yoga therapists and supervised thousands of clinical practicum cases where students work directly with real clients. One thing we've learned through that process is that the most important part of yoga therapy training is not just the classroom learning, it's the clinical training experience. That's where students begin integrating what they've learned and develop real confidence working with people. And if you're someone who is considering becoming a yoga therapist, understanding how the clinical training and practicum experience actually work is one of the most important things to look at when comparing programs. One of the challenges in the yoga therapy field is that training programs can vary quite a bit in how they approach clinical education. Some programs focus really heavily on lecture material. Others place a much stronger emphasis on supervised clinical experience. In my experience, programs that help students become the most confident practitioners combine both: strong theoretical learning and a well-structured clinical training process. Because many yoga teachers already have extensive training. You may have studied anatomy. You may have studied yoga philosophy from various angles. If you're a yoga teacher, you definitely know something about pranayama and hopefully meditation. If you've taken additional trainings, you probably have learned different therapeutic techniques. But when someone sits down in front of you with chronic pain, an anxiety disorder, autoimmune conditions, it becomes very clear that yoga therapy requires something more. It requires the ability to assess patterns and design a therapeutic process for an individual person. And that ability develops through guided clinical training. In the early stages of training, students begin developing their clinical thinking through guided case studies. In our Foundations program, students work through real therapeutic scenarios. Students work closely with an experienced yoga therapist who are teaching assistants, as well as receiving guidance from myself, the lead teacher. These discussions help students begin asking important clinical questions such as what patterns might be contributing to this client's symptoms, what therapeutic approach might be the most appropriate, how should the practice be adapted based on the client's response, what do I do if it doesn't work at all? This kind of guided casework helps students begin thinking like yoga therapists. It also prepares them for the much more intensive client practicum that comes later in the training if they choose to do that. Another key component of effective training is ongoing mentorship and supervision. Students should and are not in our school expected to navigate clinical work alone. During training, students work closely with experienced yoga therapist mentors who help them reflect on their cases and refine their clinical thinking. At Breathing Deeply Yoga Therapy, students receive supervision both from experienced yoga therapist teaching assistants and from lead faculty. Many students also value the fact that mentorship and consultation often continue even after graduation, so that graduates still have a place to discuss challenging cases and continue developing their clinical skills, which I believe to be essential. That kind of ongoing professional support can make a big difference when someone begins working independently with clients. And then we have the advanced practice. In the advanced portion of the training, students complete a 165-hour practicum of direct client work. These are direct client contact hours, meaning students are working one-on-one with individuals over multiple sessions. Students begin with a comprehensive assessment, they design therapeutic plans, and then gradually refine that process based on how a client responds. Between client sessions, students receive feedback and supervision, helping them reflect on what they are observing and how the therapeutic process is evolving. Students also participate in group case discussions, where they present cases and receive input from faculty and their peers. This combination of individual supervision and group learning helps students develop deeper clinical insight. Over time, they begin to recognize patterns across many different clients and conditions. And this is essential because there are so many conditions a yoga therapist might encounter in their career. Another important part of effective training is learning a clear and consistent clinical method. In our program, faculty members are not each teaching completely different therapeutic approaches, which is actually pretty common in a lot of programs. Instead, our teachers regularly use the same underlying clinical framework in their own therapeutic work with clients. It's our method. And that consistency helps students develop a clear understanding of how to assess patterns, design therapeutic practices, and work effectively with real people. Over time, we realized that we were teaching a very specific way of approaching therapeutic work. And that framework eventually became what we now call the BDYT clinical method. The BDYT clinical method is built around 3 core stages. First is holistic pattern assessment. Students learn how to observe the interaction between breath, posture, nervous system regulation, mental patterning, and lifestyle patterns. Second is skillful therapeutic design. Students design individual practices that match the patterns that they observe in the client. And the third is guided clinical practice. Students work with real clients while receiving mentorship and supervision from experienced faculty. This process helps students gradually develop genuine clinical competence. One thing we track carefully at Breathing Deeply is the outcomes of our student practicum work. Across hundreds of supervised practicum cases, over 85% of clients report meaningful improvement in their symptoms and overall well-being. That kind of outcome reflects the fact that students are learning not just techniques, but a clinical process for understanding and working with the whole person. And that's what you can learn here. By the time students complete their practicum experience, something important has shifted. They are no longer simply learning information. They're learning how to think clinically. They become more confident in assessing patterns, designing individualized practices, skillfully adapting sessions over time, and supporting the therapeutic process and supporting clients through meaningful change in their lives. So when you're evaluating different yoga therapy training programs, it's worth paying close attention to how the clinical training and practicum experience is structured. Because ultimately, the goal of yoga therapy training isn't just to receive a certification. It's to develop the ability to help people effectively. And that's probably why you're interested in this work. If you'd like to learn more about how we train yoga therapists at Breathing Deeply Yoga Therapy, you could visit the link below where we explain the program and the BDYT clinical method in more detail. But I hope this information has been useful to you, and I certainly hope that we hear from you soon and hopefully get to know you a little bit. Thank you for listening. Om Shanti.